Scottish Affairs Committee and our ongoing inquiry into the space sector in Scotland. Today we're going to be joined by the satellite manufacturers and those involved in the satellite applications. It's the satellite manufacturers we have first, and representatives of a couple of companies currently operating in Scotland will now allowed to introduce themselves and anything. But we have a short introductory statement. We'll start with you, Mr. Greenland.
Oh, sure. So, good afternoon. My name's Steve Greenland. I'm the Managing Director of Craft Prospects. We're a company based in Govan, in Glasgow. We're employee-owned, between around 25 people, formed in 2017. We work on bringing new technologies in quantum and AI into space technologies and getting those flown, so for next generation type missions, which includes secure telecoms, Earth observation and climate monitoring. In 2021 we raised just close to 1.5 million, which we used to then secure a mission called VOLT, Versatile Optical Laboratory for Telecoms, which is an ESA UKSA supported programme, around 17 million euros, and that allows us to work within the Scottish supply chain in particular to develop all the tools that we need to be able to deliver next generation capabilities. Prior to setting up Craft Prospect, then I was the technical lead on Scotland's first satellite, UCube-1, that was launched in 2014, and I think you've heard from some of the companies that benefited from that previously.
Excellent, thank you for that. Mr. Walkinshaw.
Hey everyone, so I'm Tom Walkinshaw. I'm the founder and CEO of Alba Orbital Limited, and we design, build and launch PolCube satellites. So this is an example of satellite we have in orbit just now, so you can get the size. It's Unicorn 2, named after the national animal of Scotland, the unicorn. We've launched 41 satellites. And
just tell us what that does now. You've shown it to everybody. I'm sure all the viewers at home will be intrigued.
If you want, you can touch it and prod it and stuff. So essentially this is, Alba is famous for basically building satellites under 1 kilogram. We're the world leaders in that sort of technology globally. We run the developer conference in Glasgow every year for all the developers. And this satellite is Unicorn 2, so it has a camera configuration in here, so you can see the camera. So that basically takes pictures in space of Earth. We have antennas, we have solar panels that pop out, we have control system reaction wheels and magnetorquers. So it's basically a fully functional little satellite that does everything a bigger satellite can do, but in a smaller form factor. And just now there's currently 6 of these in orbit.
Did they work effectively as the bigger satellites that we've seen already?
Yeah, so the resolution's smaller, so you have a smaller camera lens. So that's the main difference really between a small satellite and a large satellite when it comes to optics, is the resolution. But the interesting thing is if you make them really small, you can do lots of them and you can build bigger constellations, and that's really where Alba kind of sits. And so far we've launched 41 satellites into space. I think 15 are unicorns that we built in Glasgow. The rest are rideshare customers from around the world, so like Argentina, Spain, Germany, Turkey, Malaysia, just all over the place really. Alba's raised $3.4 million US from Y Combinator in the US and a bunch of Silicon Valley based angels, just a bunch of random folks. We have the CEO of Fitbit's an investor, Joe Montana, the American footballer, is an investor. We have this most eclectic bunch of folks. We run a 5,000 square foot facility in Hillington. We just opened up in Glasgow to mass produce this type of satellite and ground stations. That's kind of the gist of it. And then I started the company about 11 years ago in my bedroom, and now we've launched 41 satellites. So.
Well, I think it's probably the first time ever that a satellite is being produced at a Westminster Select Committee, so congratulations, and trailblazer in that regard.
It was fun trying to get through security with it.
Yeah, I bet it was. It's only a satellite, Mr. Officer, honestly, is that what it was? We
had to explain what it was.
They're
cool. So.
And just for our many viewers at home, Mr. Walkinshaw's perhaps being typically modest because he's listed in Forbes as the 30 under 30 list of young leaders and entrepreneurs. And I'm intrigued with something you said in an interview you did with Wired. We never get interviewed by Wired. You guys, that happens to you all the time. Where you said, space is really capital intensive. I had to start my own company. It was my only option.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that, why you felt that
I started Alba, we officially incorporated the first version of Alba in 2012. So back then in Glasgow, there was only really one other company, which Steve worked at as well, that really was doing anything. So I wouldn't really call it a sector if there was only one company, obviously, that had, I don't think they'd even flown a full satellite at that point. So, I had to essentially either move away somewhere that, satellites were happening, or I had to start a company. And that was kind of like the only two options if I wanted to do something in space. So I chose, obviously, to start a company. In terms of capital intensive, so like I sort of mentioned earlier, We've raised capital in America now. We done a Delaware flip about 2 or 3 years ago. So that's basically when you changed your headquarters from UK to US as part of the Y Combinator program. And that was to really raise capital because we found that.
We'll come into that in a minute because we're intrigued about that. We just
sure, yeah.
Just like you're both obviously Scottish based, and we'll discuss some of the headquartering issues in a minute. What we try to do in this report as much as possible is just speak up the scale of the Scottish sector, its potential, like just the range of activities that we do. Are we right in that regard? Is Scotland a good place for you guys to do business? And is it something that you're excited about in the future, about Scotland being there as a major player? We'll start with you, Mr. Greenland.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the potential that we have in Scotland is massive, and that's because we can go from kind of the R&D in the universities through launch, through developing the satellites, through operations, and then into the downstream and the data processing that goes along with it. So I think that there's the opportunity there. That there's definitely challenges that we can go into around financing and skills and all kind of the normal challenges that go along with trying to start and maintain a small business. But yeah, I would have a large amount of optimism for the space industry.
You, Mr. Walkinshaw?
As in terms of optimism for Scotland in space, I guess I'm a product of that optimism. I wouldn't be doing this, I wouldn't be sitting here if I wasn't optimistic about the Scottish space sector. I was probably optimistic when no one was optimistic. So, certainly the sector today is, compared to 10 years ago or even 20 years ago, it's night and day. I think regularly we're launching, and there probably has been hundreds of satellites built in Glasgow now that have launched. We've done 15. I think Spire and Clydespace have done a fair number. I think Spire's probably over 100 now. I'm not sure on the Clydespace numbers, but yeah, we're talking hundreds of satellites that have been produced.
There does seem to be in specific sectors, obviously small satellites, maybe not, we're not seeing one as small as yours, but yeah. Is that the sort of areas that we tend to be dominant in an extent?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit self-fulfilling, as in, people start companies in small satellites, and then people like Steve move to Scotland to work on small satellites and then start their own companies in small satellites. So it's very vicarious circle, where, the more we do it, the more we get, sort of certain excellence where people want to move. I mean, people move from the southeast of England to go to Glasgow to work on these things, which is, what sector would you say that happens? It's pretty rare, right? So if that's what's happening, then yeah, I mean, I think it's a real thing, and hopefully it keeps continuing,
Okay, let's talk about your headquartering then, because you're currently both headquartered in Glasgow. I mean, what we've heard, of course, is that there's huge temptations to link up with international partners, be bought over perhaps, and maybe move your enterprise, beyond Scotland. Tell us what that's like, if that's something that you're familiar with, and like what you're doing, if you're doing anything to make sure you continue to be a Scottish company.
Yeah, so I mean, I think like a lot of space companies, we kind of found that we had to be in multiple jurisdictions to get stuff done. So we have a German company really driven around our licensing. We have a ground station just outside Berlin. We also have a US painting company that essentially bought the UK and the German operations about 2 years ago, 3 years ago now actually, when we done the Y Combinator, and that was like sort of condition of entry into the program. And for those not aware, Y Combinator is the top program in Silicon Valley for the next hot startups basically. So you're talking Airbnb, Dropbox, Reddit, these companies, their first investment was YC, and it's sort of, if you can get into YC, and we were the first ever Scottish company to take investment from Y Combinator, so that was a really huge thing for not just Alba and the space sector, but like the whole tech industry in Scotland. We were the first guys to kind of break that glass ceiling to say that a company started in Scotland could raise capital at this top program in America, which had never happened. So And in terms of the headquartering, so technically we're headquartered in Delaware, I guess.
Where, sorry?
Delaware.
Delaware, okay.
Where that's more like a kind of like to help the fundraising aspect. US investors typically don't want to deal. Y Combinator don't allow limited companies in their programs, so you'd have to do what's called a Delaware flip, where you change the ownership to a US entity. We obviously raised quite a lot of capital, like $3.4 million in the space of about a month, basically. And if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't be able to take part in the program. But in terms of our operations, most of our operations are in Glasgow. We have the factory in Glasgow, and we do our licensing through Germany as well. So we're sort of spread out in a few different jurisdictions.
Thank you. Your experience, Mr. Greenland?
Our ambition is to stay within Scotland, within Glasgow. We've had satellite offices previously in Edinburgh, and would be looking to set up with offices either in Europe or the rest of the UK. In the fullness of time. Our investment comes from within the UK, which is slightly different to Tom's. So that allows us to have a more UK kind of centric stakeholder base, which at times is slightly at conflict with some of the policies that take place around kind of supporting inward investment, whereas our money comes from London, which doesn't get as well supported as maybe money that might come from the US, maybe not in Tom's case, but in other companies' case.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, obviously a big part of the work that we're doing here is having a look at the UK and Scottish Government strategies, because obviously they've thought long and hard about how they want to grow this sector, recognise new opportunities and the progress that's been made, particularly around about Glasgow. I mean, are you familiar with what the UK and Scottish Government are attempting to achieve, and what do you make of what you've observed so far? We'll start with you, Mr. Greenland, on that one, if that's all right.
So the recently released Space Industrial Plan, I think, is good on the whole. It has lots of actions, and it's quite action-oriented. It needs to be delivered upon, and obviously the budgets are only set for the next year, so I think the next thing that needs to happen is kind of longer-term thinking about how space is developed as a critical national infrastructure and as a science base and all of these things. So we need longer-term confidence in where the money is going to be coming from. We can't survive on how it has been in previous years where, for example, my business, we were well supported for a period of 7 months, and then that disappeared as a result of changes in government policy. And that was very, very difficult to navigate. Once you've taken on staff, you're in the middle of...
So which changes would that be you're referring to?
This was through a particular programme of the UK Space Agency's, which didn't then follow through into kind of the next phase of project, which for a business which is balancing the commercial and the R&D, so we reinvest our profits from the commercial side in the R&D as match funding, so that then we can keep progressing and keep innovating. And when that model disappears because something suddenly changes, that can be really difficult. Fortunately, we managed to move over into securing the ESA mission, Volt, which has allowed us to continue on our journey to get the flight heritage that we need to deliver new services. And we now have customers like, or end users like BT and AWS lined up so that we can demonstrate services to them and then look to turn them more into customers or in future.
Excellent, thank you. And to you, Mr. Walkinshaw, what do you make of what our respective governments are doing to help you grow your business and world domination in the space sector?
That may be a loaded question. Governments. So, I mean, there's obviously lots of different levels of government, lots of different interactions with different folks, from, local councils all the way through to the sort of UK and Scottish governments, and even European governments now as well with ESA. I mean, our experience was initially we got a lot of support with the European Space Agency and the original sort of UK delegates, which was via Innovate UK. We have, I think we're in 2018, 2019 was the last time we'd won a major contract with sort of ESA or UKSA, sort of backing that, or Innovate UK as it was back a few years ago with the delegates. So we haven't really had a major government contract in probably 4 years, I reckon, maybe 3-4 years. And we actually got audited. We got a lot of audits from ESA. We got audited and we won 4 or 5 contracts, and then we had 2 years of audits. And the problem with audits is if a government department just decide to start auditing you, like you know, we had like 1 bookkeeper part-time, and we were getting like special treatment from like ESA on these audits, which wasn't appreciated. But we had no option other than to like comply. So that is really what forced us to do the YC program, to be honest. Was it went from like, here's, you know, money to do what you guys need to get done, to like, we're going to just like, you know, go through every single line item, and that was really painful for us, and that really forced us either, you know, we go the YC route or we don't, you know, and that's kind of what forced us to to go that way. So in terms of regulation, I think in the UK, we set up the Germany company to license our satellites. Unfortunately, none of our customers, like we've launched 41 satellites into space, and none of them have been UK flagged, for example. UK flags, basically, if you think of it like ships of the sea, every ship has a port that it flags the spaceship or the ship. We license in Germany. Germany's been really friendly to us. They've been really easy to work with. The UK regulations are quite out of date. They're very geostationary satellite focused, which was big in the 80s, but you know, we're no longer in the 80s. So you know, reform of that is something that's been talked about. But I've not actually seen anything actually really change on the front lines, and that's really forced us to go via Germany, DLR, the German Space Agency, and BNetzA, the German sort of version of Alcom.
I mean, the 5 major goals in the UK government's national space strategy is grow and level up our space economy, promote the values of global Britain, lead, pioneer in scientific discovery and inspire the nation, and protect and defend our national interests, and use space to deliver for UK citizens and the world, which is a rather lofty ambition. Is that are we getting there in terms of these goals as set out very clearly by the UK strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you run a startup, I mean, it's cool that there's all this stuff going on around about you, but you're really just focused on getting customers and making them happy. So like, it's great that there's a lot of fanfare and a lot of sort of people shouting from the sidelines, rather than people booing us, you know. Generally, it's nice to be loved rather than hated. But yeah, I mean, it's cool. Whether it really affects us in our day-to-day operations, not really, I don't think. You know, hopefully it would. You know, hopefully it would open up more sort of opportunities to work with governments. We work with the National Park Service of America, for example, and we don't work with, you know, anybody in the UK, you know, in national parks, for example, for our imaging service. So, you know, if those sort of things came our way, great. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to find customers and make them happy, you know, and look after them, and hopefully they come back, which most of our customers do come back. So we're doing okay in that front.
Just lastly from me, for just now, it's just some of the evidence that we've received thus far suggests that being located in Scotland presents an additional challenge to small companies engaging at UK level. Have any of your businesses experienced disadvantages as a result of being based in Scotland, and how could we, the UK government bodies, help to rectify that? Mr. Greenland?
So I think it can be a disadvantage. There can be a bias towards kind of Harwell, London areas. However, I think that Scotland fares no better than other regions in the UK. It's fantastic that we have kind of a Scottish focused ecosystem. I think for me and for my business, the way that we tried to overcome that was to get more involved in UK Space, the trade body, and to try and get our voice heard more at the national level. And I think that started to work, and we're starting to see that reflected in some of the things that we see coming back from governments. But that does take time. It's a long process, and so when we're starting to think about things like government procurement of satellite services, ensuring that is accessible to SMEs like ours is really, really key, because if that's going to happen, and it's going to happen fast to respond to kind of the emergent needs, then it would be very easy that we would get neglected. So I think the answer to that is ensuring that there is more government presence within Scotland, so MOD, DCIT, whatever, so that there can be more one-to-one dialogues between industry that's based there and those organisations. I think that one of the risks in having too many support organisations is that voice can get diluted, and can be kind of gate-kept. So I think it needs to be as direct as possible within the resource constraints on both sides.
Have you any views on that, Mr. Walkinshaw, at all? I mean, we are second, aren't we, when it comes to the nations region of the UK. London and the South East obviously is the biggest part of the sector, but we're a good second, aren't we?
I mean, by number of satellites built, Scotland's miles ahead. I mean, like, just empirically. I mean, like, the numbers are out there probably, or someone could compile them. But, like, in terms of number of satellites, I mean, Scotland's probably built more satellites than England, just, like, in general. I mean, I think I'm right in saying that. I mean, it's worth somebody fact-checking it, but, I mean, it's probably true. And we're number one in Europe in terms of, in Glasgow, for number of satellites built. We're probably number 3 globally behind San Francisco and Seattle, because you have Starlink in Seattle with SpaceX, and you have Planet Labs in San Francisco and a bunch of other startups. So I think we're number 3 globally for number of satellites built. In terms of like, our challenge is more like at the ESA delegate level, is just it's hard to get a hold of the right person, it's hard to meet the right person. They obviously are based in the southeast of England. And for us, like, yeah, I mean, it's not like, it's something like, it's nice for our business, but we're just trying to make a real business with customers. So, like, obviously, if we can get a ESA contract like we have in the past and we haven't had recently, then great. It's quite hard to figure out who does what, when, and yeah, I mean, obviously, coming to visit Scotland, you know, obviously you guys would be welcome to come visit Alba whenever. But yeah, just generally speaking, like, I guess there is that risk of, you know, how do you know what you've missed if you're not around? It's hard to quantify that.
Where's your business based? I've got in my notes, started in your bedroom, I'm presuming it's not.
It's not currently in my bedroom now. We moved on a little bit. We overgrew the facilities. We're in Hillington, so it's near the airport in Glasgow. So it's like 2 miles from the airport, something like that. So it's near Braehead, if you're...
Excellent, thank you for that. Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to our witnesses. Could I maybe start with you, Mr. Walkinshaw, about this Delaware flip? And you mentioned that Wired article about the capital, but can you just tell us, so from starting in your bedroom to moving to Hillington and that flip, what stage, because you obviously didn't need, or you could have done with, but you didn't get that capital investment early on. Can you kind of go through that timeline just so we understand how it's grown?
Yeah, I mean, it was like, this is over like 11 years, so it's like a lot to sort of, I'll try and keep it relevant. So yeah, we're bootstrapped for the first 8 years, and bootstrap basically means like you make progress without raising capital and sort of startup sort of text.
Because you can't make capital, is it?
A combination. I mean, the tech investment scene in Scotland in particular, you know, UK is far behind Silicon Valley. I don't think it's a super controversial statement. There's just a lot more of an ecosystem in other parts of the world. We did try to raise capital periodically, and failed miserably. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't like we didn't try, but certainly we went over to the States. The fact that we actually managed to bootstrap our first 6 satellites to orbit, which was seen as a marker of a really true, you know, hardcore, you know, entrepreneur, that we were able to pull that off, you know, and that really got us a ton of attention in America, that we were able to do this, you know, really without any investment. Which
you think without that you wouldn't have got the investment, the millions that you eventually got from Delaware?
I mean, it's hard to say exactly, like, cause and effect on things. Certainly it's slowed us down not being able to raise capital sooner, and certainly have, like, you know, starting off in Glasgow has its pros and its cons, you know, and certainly raising capital is not, you know, I'm not sure there's ever been a $1 billion unicorn company founded in Glasgow, you know. So, you know, you don't have kind of an example or a playbook and things nearby to kind of go off. And we were the first Scottish company to do YC, so there was no real precedent in Scotland to go in that route. But ironically, we do actually, our first investor was actually Scottish, because he was a founder that went out to Silicon Valley. Actually, I think our first and second out of the 40 investors we have were actually Scots in America that were associated with that, ironically, in a weird kind of twist of fate sort of thing. So, yeah, I mean, certainly going abroad, and ultimately, I mean, all the money's spent in Scotland anyway, so we were very much like wanting to build stuff in Scotland and basically just use America as a vehicle to kind of get us in the door and get the capital we need, you know, and really have a somewhat level playing field with a lot of the other companies that are raising and starting out in America, because there's such a handicap really being, you know, based in Scotland and being based in the UK from a tech perspective, from a fundraising perspective, that, just people in my batch have raised like hundreds of millions, and they were in the same group as me, and I'm like raising like 3.4, and it's like embarrassingly small compared to like Stoke Space that raised like, I don't know, 150 million. So even within that group, it's a good group to be part of, but the bar's just so much higher and the ambition's so much higher, and you don't really get that obviously really anywhere in the world apart from YC. So yeah.
And what are you at now with staffing levels and such like?
We're around about 15ish, so sort of fluctuates kind of, but around about there, yeah.
And can I ask you about, and I'll come on to Mr. Greenland in a minute, can I ask you about the licensing and how more user-friendly, would you say, Germany is at the moment? I mean, given, I think you described them as a bit dated, the current rules here, could we lift what they have in Germany and, implement it here? And if we did, what difference would that make? Would you, to your business and to what we do here in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the German process is much more streamlined. I mean, the UK process is quite heavy because I think they kind of came up with it when they were building like 1-ton geostationary satellites, so it's very involved, and there's lots of like risk on the person applying for the license. There's a lot of upfront cost. There's an insurance premium that's not applied in a lot of other countries that is expected for UK companies, which makes it disproportionately hard for small satellites to get licensed versus larger satellites. So yeah, there's a bunch of things that could be improved. And I think it is sort of well known. There's been committees and a lot of talk of I forget the terminology of government, but when you put out sort of surveys of people's opinions and things, consultations, yeah.
Are you involved in them? Do you feel like your voice?
I mean, like 10 years ago. So like, I mean, I'd love something actionable to happen, but. Yeah, I mean, it's I'm not going to change, the workings of government, so I need to...
You never know, maybe through the Scottish Affairs Committee you will.
Well, hopefully, I mean, if you guys can surprise me, I'd love it. And power to you guys if you want to get stuck into that issue. And I mean, I think it is a huge issue, to be fair, and it's one of those ones that is like there in plain sight that could get fixed if enough critical mass got put on it. And I mean... it's like, the question is like, what do you want people to do? Like, I mean, like, if you want people to fly satellites, then try and make life easy for people to fly satellites. And if you fly satellites and you can operate satellites, you can make money selling the data from the satellites. And Scotland already is a huge player in that game. So the more you can enable that or sort of make life easier on the government side, I think that would be like welcomed by probably everybody in the sector, really. I don't think anybody would be complaining for like, more German like regulation,
Thank you. Mr. Greenland, I was looking at your written evidence that you'd put in, and there's a couple of points I'd just like you to maybe expand on if you could. You state, in my view, historically, Space Scotland did not always sufficiently represent the industry as a whole to the detriment of some aspects of industry. Could you explain that a bit more, and has that improved? You also make it's particularly important given Space Scotland is so strongly linked to the Scottish Government. And maybe some of the tensions or otherwise with that.
So I think for us as a business, then we found more ability to engage through UK space with at a national level.
So even as a company based in Scotland and very much
felt easier at the time. Okay. This was 2017, 2018. Mm-hmm. So we were setting up. I think it was the predecessor to Space Scotland. I think that was the Space Leadership Council or something like that. And that felt a little bit difficult for us to engage with. And quite close to the Scottish Government at the time, yeah. And so we chose to kind of look more southward, and that required quite a lot of travel on my part, going down, meeting people, going to Harwell, coming into London, building those relationships, which then allowed us to then grow in time. Mm-hmm. But it was a lot of effort and travel required, whereas I think that there's now, and I believe that this is changing, and Space Scotland can become more of a vehicle for the whole of industry and the whole of the ecosystem within Scotland. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you go on to say the government through SDI is seen, and I think you alluded to this in response to the chair, but it's seen by some to over-reward inward investment from non-UK countries and can ignore organically grown opportunities or investment from the rest of the UK. Is that still a concern you have?
That does reflect kind of my frustration. I think something that got raised in the previous evidence around kind of how some companies have been supported to move over here, and that can create jobs displacement rather than jobs creation. And so we end up in a skills limited environment, not incubating the skills that we need and just seeing people move around. And so, yeah, there is a need to make sure that when we're writing policies like that, then we get it right in terms of ensuring that one type of business or one growth journey for a business, because there's lots of different diverse types of industry, that we get that understood and right for all of them, so we have a more level playing field. That's the goal of what I'm trying to get to. Yeah.
And skills is something that we've raised a lot in this inquiry. I think you said in your opening remarks you've got 25 employees. Is that?
Yeah, it's between 25 and 30. Yeah.
And Mr. Walkinshaw's got about 15. How difficult or not has it been to recruit people with that skill set and to get them to be based in Scotland? Are they Scottish students? Are they Scottish employees? Have they come from elsewhere in the UK, Europe, or around the world? And challenges or opportunities to recruit people to Scotland?
You go first, or? Okay. So our workforce is probably younger than some other businesses. We tend to take graduates, but also non-traditional kind of entries as well. And we do invest quite a lot in building up those skills. And so there is a need to ensure that we can maintain those skills, and there isn't then distortions in the market, which means that our investment in those people suddenly means that they disappear to other organisations that might have been supported more highly by funding mechanisms.
Where are your 25 to 30 mainly from? Are they Scottish based? Are they internationally sourced? Or
so the majority of them will have either studied or lived in Scotland. So we don't tend to manage to bring people over. I would say that would be kind of 80% would have been based in Scotland before we employed them, but we do kind of employ kind of a different base. So we've got kind of ex-service, we've got people who were not able to get on with university, and so we're looking to have a different route in, so taking apprenticeships and that type of route in. So I think that we do need to be more, we do need to be quite innovative as smaller businesses in finding those bits, those really niche talents, and then trying to find ways of maintaining them and keeping them there. And that's sort of the goal with Craft, where we have the employee ownership model. So ensuring that the team are able to kind of come along with me and other shareholders on the journey, and that they get some reward based on that. So we have an employee ownership trust which holds part of the business. All individuals in the company can hold shares in their own name. And these sorts of things, and that's how we can kind of differentiate ourselves a little bit from other organisations and try and maintain those really key skills.
Walkinshaw?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, we're the same. We have a sort of stock options plan as well to try and align people with the sort of financial outcomes of the company. I mean, it is a challenge for probably every business in the UK to try and find good people. I mean, our demographic is probably very similar to Steve's demographic in terms of graduates, PhD, folks who've been floating around some other industries, and I think the space is obviously pretty cool and pretty interesting, so that attracts a certain type of person that, is, I mean, you ultimately want people that want to do it regardless of the business and just want to be involved in the space sector. That's really, like, I think a lot of people at Alba, working on satellites is cool, getting your fingerprints in space is cool, that's really something that drives it a lot. Certainly, like, it's been difficult, I think, recruiting just generally in the UK. Obviously the regulations have changed a lot recently in the last few years. That hurt us a lot. We had a lot of EU engineers, and just now it's
Mr. Greenland was about 80% Scottish based. Were you?
Yeah, so I mean, if I think back to maybe 2017, 2018, I think our engineering team was probably like 70-80% EU, and now it's probably 20%, something like that. So I mean, it's really hard us a lot on trying to get sort of skilled. A lot of people were coming to Scotland to work, we don't really see that as much maybe as we did. It's obviously there's more regulations to try and get people on and visas and things, so And that's just something we haven't really went down that rabbit hole yet, but we definitely have to look into that, I think, as an option. Yeah, we had a Canadian guy joined us as well, so we've started picking people up from Canada now as well. So, but yeah, I think it's a challenge for literally any business, and we're not different from everyone else. And I'm trying to get folks to stay with the company as we progress is a challenge as well. But I mean, I was looking into our retention numbers, and we are above UK average for our retention and churn and all these things. I ran the numbers last week just to kind of get a handle on where we sit, like globally, or within the UK at least. So we're doing better than average, but we're always trying to improve it, you know.
And for both of you, what's the gender balance of your workforce?
Ours is about 60-40.
Yeah, I mean, ours is...
in favour of males.
Yep.
Yeah, ours is predominantly male. Yeah, it's probably like, I don't know, like 25, 75, something like that, yeah.
And do you, for both of you again, finally, do you see staffing and recruitment as a handicap or a barrier going forward, or do you think there will still be, and we've heard this a lot, you know, the excitement of seeing you're involved in space? It is an industry that younger people, everyone wants to have a handle of. Is that something that as you continue to grow you're worried about, or you think you will be able to meet those challenges as you expand? Mr. Greenland?
I hope that we can, for sure. I think that there is, with the types of missions that we're able to work on, then that does attract, as Tom said, some really amazing talent, and they will be the people who will kind of lead companies in the future. You know, they're that way inclined. So, from an economic point of view, I think that it's all positive in that those skills ultimately will disperse around, hopefully Scotland and the rest of the UK. From the company point of view, then for sure, like kind of worrying about where the next, especially slightly more senior type people will come from. That's where I would be more concerned. Yeah.
You're nodding, Mr. Walkinshaw.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to find good people that want to stay with you for the journey, you know, and yeah, I mean, it's just a hard game, you know. So yeah, I mean, I think like just generally more, I don't know, certainly there's the kind of the early stage hires and like keeping them in the company and just trying to get the right folks on the bus really is always the challenge. So, and keeping them happy in the long term. I mean, our management team, I think our average retention is like 7 years now. So our management team's really solid in terms of churn and things. We're only like 11-year-old company, so I'm not even sure how that's possible, but that's what the numbers say. So, so that's really good. Outside that team, we definitely have challenges in engineering. We have challenges just generally like manufacturing. Yeah, I mean, our company still is relatively small, so we don't have like lots of bench depth, you know, because we're just a small company, and that's the challenge for a small company is, you know, sometimes you're fixing the toilets and sometimes you're building satellites, you know, it's just, that's the way it works. And some people are open to that and cool with it, and some people aren't, and trying to find those people is the trick, right? So, yeah.
Okay, thank you both very much. Thank you, Chief.
Allan Brown.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Good afternoon. Can I just start with yourself, Mr. Walkinshaw? So, if we go back to the Delaware flap, so you did the Delaware flap, that allowed investment into the company that you're looking for. Since then, is there any subsequent pressures to look at relocating to the States, given that it's US investment? You've got the IRA, which actually incentivises manufacturing, you know, in the States?
Not really. I mean, like, there might be like business opportunities that we would get more access to if we had more presence there. You know, like a lot of the sort of defense stuff in the US, you know, is sort of contingent on some sort of presence probably. But there's no real pressure from our current investor base to relocate, you know. So they just want us to grow up a company. You know, they're not too hung up on which jurisdiction it's based in. You know, they want the company to be really valuable, whether it's, you know, ops are here or ops are there, you know. That's fundamentally what matters to them.
Okay, thanks. And just look at government support in terms of contracts versus grants. So we've already heard, and it's been touched on today already, but we heard from other companies where they'd much rather have contracts that's revenue generating and provides a bit of sustainability. So is that still a trick that's getting missed by each of the respective governments, and what's the barriers to actually even finding out and about accessing contracts? I know you said the audit issue, but is there other barriers?
Yeah, I mean the audit issue is more just like I think a cultural issue, and just like that's more we were getting tied up in like knots over this 5 people in an audit department coming after us, and it's like a part-time bookkeeper, like we weren't like ready for like they couldn't differentiate between an SME and like Airbus, so we kind of got treated in the same bucket, which was a little bit unfortunate, but all passed obviously and was successful. So the other question, sorry, I got lost track.
It was really just, what barriers are there to actually getting government contracts and even finding out and getting...
It's a cultural thing, to be honest. I think, like, for whatever reason, when these agencies were set up or these government departments were set up, a lot of it was co-funding R&D grant-based, and that seemed to be just the way they got set up, and that seems to be like the dominant type of funding structure in the UK for early stage and maybe middle stage companies to engage with the government in many levels. It's kind of very R&D centric. Let's potentially create some jobs in a sector. I'm not exactly sure the mechanics of government, so like forgive me for not like fully understanding all the mechanisms. But I mean, I think like was probably said in previous panels, I think there's a big opportunity for the government to take advantage of all the really interesting stuff that's happening here on its doorstep, So we've only recently just had our first UK customer for launch, and we never had the government like launch a satellite. I actually think, if you exclude OneWeb, Alba could end up launching more satellites than like the whole the UK has in its history, if you take the OneWeb constellation out of it. So I think there's like huge advantages that like companies like mine and Steve's and all the others that you're talking to like are doing really interesting stuff, and we work with people all around the world, and we don't really work on a contract basis with folks in Scotland or folks in the UK even. We work with people in Malaysia who are trying to put up IoT networks. We work with people in Argentina. We work with people in Spain. And there's just like so much advantage that these other countries are getting from space that we just don't want to be left behind, and I think like the Scottish space sector, the Scottish satellite sector, it's a bit of an outlier. It's kind of just organically popped up, without a lot of kind of really government support. It's been really entrepreneur driven, and that's kind of unusual, I think, and there's kind of critical mass behind that, and that's kind of really hard to get going, but now it is going, and it's just and that's pretty rare globally, so just trying to help that grow and nurture it and support it, I think is probably a good thing for like everyone really.
Okay, and you mentioned earlier on that you're providing data to the National Park Services of the United States. You just mentioned some other countries there. So is there a reality that governments and agencies that provide effective arm's length functions for government, are they just missing a track in Scotland and the UK?
Yeah, I guess so. Obviously I'm not in the government, so I can't say if they are or not, but certainly it seems that like other countries are maybe more proactive in like treating companies like a supplier rather than, I don't know, it just feels like the culture in the UK is more like, I wouldn't say treat entrepreneurs like beggars, but like in the US, like people like who work in say Microsoft would like get hit up by angel investors wanting to leave their job to start a company. So there's real like celebration of entrepreneur and like real kind of like, this is amazing, you guys are building these big companies, and it's real different culture, and I think the UK, you have all these amazing companies like on the doorstep there that are all doing amazing things for people all around the world, and it seems like the government could be more efficient and could get a lot more capabilities. And we talk about war in Ukraine, it's like a big thing. Like we have an Earth observation constellation, and we've never talked to the Defence Department here. So like, we can provide a lot of interesting stuff there. There's a lot of humanitarian applications. We can track migrant boats with our satellites. We could do lots of things. These hot topical issues. We never have the conversations, so it's kind of we'd love to chat and we'd love to figure out how to navigate the government, but obviously it's a huge entity, and it's I'm sure lots of people are not aware of all the opportunities that are on the doorstep, from like all the companies that are you're meeting. So
thanks. Mr. Greenland, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that. And I know you had also mentioned earlier on, almost got kind of burned with the UK Space Agency's change in tack. So do you have a view about government as a contractor in providing services, rather than the rather uncertain stop-start nature?
So I do think that there's a number of opportunities for government to procure services that haven't yet been explored and will be good in future. And from what I understand, that is kind of policy moving forward in the space industrial plan. I think that the risks are, if you look at how some of the larger, for example, defence programs have worked, which were procurement, the accessibility of those for smaller businesses like mine was pretty much non-existent. And so there is a risk when moving to a more procurement model that companies do get left behind. So there does need to be enough transparency, enough measures in place to ensure that it is addressing kind of the diverse industrial base that we want to see emerge.
And you seen any evidence of officials in the MOD recognising that procurement process as a big barrier to smaller companies, and and what they're doing to change that? Then
I think there is recognition. I think that it's a huge thing to try and change, and to try and change that, and then also introduce kind of procurement across government. I think that it's something that we have to do. We need to be moving faster. We need to be placing contracts with more agility. So we have to solve this problem. We have spoken. I have had conversations most recently at the space conference in November about ways that we could look at involving more smaller businesses in defence procurement. Hopefully by association in other types of government procurement. So I think that there is a willingness to try and listen and to try and learn, and it's a two-way dialogue that hopefully this will form part of.
And is that envisages coming about by a company like yourself direct bidding in the procurement process, or would it be part of a supply chain? If I look at civil engineer contracting, for example, you tend to have what's called tier 1 contractors, and they'll bid for big jobs, but then they have that whole supply chain.
So I think that space is slightly different to that, in that companies like my own and companies like Tom can deliver as the prime inner supply chain, even though that we're smaller size for niche applications, for niche services. Then it is possible that we're at that kind of prime level and subcontracting out others, and that's exactly what we're doing with something like Volt. We're working with a whole heap of different companies within the Scottish industry to bring them into our supply chain to deliver and demonstrate new technologies and new services. So I think that the big guys will stay important for some types of services and probably should do, but there is a whole heap of new and emerging services which should be which SMEs should be allowed to access at the same level as the larger companies.
Okay, and there's no barriers. I mean, I know, again, if I just go back to what I'm more familiar with in terms of civil engineering contracting, sometimes for smaller companies there's barriers put in the way in terms of insurances and liabilities that are disproportionate, effectively the size of companies. Is there any issues like that, or?
I mean, I don't have a lot of experience in the procurement side of the government, to be honest. Certainly a lot of the stuff we're developing is so new that it tends to not be a real understanding of what I can do for different parts of the government. So I think to procure something you need to know it exists first, really. So there's probably that kind of challenge of, that's a challenge too. And there's departments that do buy satellites, but it seems like very kind of, it's not like a continual program or anything. It's there's a lot of energy around one program and one mission, and then there's maybe nothing for a long time. And often the requirements are really driven, the satellites come in different shapes and sizes, and if you put a requirement for a certain class of satellite, you often tend to have a company in mind for that, if that makes sense. So it's, if you build a skyscraper, there's probably only a few firms in the UK that can build skyscrapers. You're not going to get, some small family firm trying to build a skyscraper. So it's kind of like that too, I think.
Okay, and thanks for that. If I just move on, looking at exports, Mr. Greenland, I don't know if you can explain what kind of proportion of your revenue comes from exports compared to domestic sales. How easy is it to identify and take advantage of export opportunities?
So some of the technologies that we work with fall under export control, so that can make it more difficult, especially as a smaller business, to understand the rules and to get the right permissions in place. But they're there for a reason, so we should be kind of compliant to them, not arguing to remove them. Yeah. So for that side of things, then I don't see too many barriers, especially working with allied countries. I think that there is a need on the financing side, because those opportunities take time to develop, and so that the amount of resources that we need to apply just to go after one of those types of contracts can be quite large to get through the different stages of bidding. I think that through developing ourselves with other UK companies, then we can present and to do kind of UK oriented demonstrator missions as we are doing, then we can then work together to present kind of a more coherent opportunity for export with all the different industries working together, all the different parts of the industry.
Okay, and does the Scottish Government or the UK Government then recognise that resource impact that, obviously for you to pursue export opportunities, and that collaboration you're talking about, does that just come about organically, or is there more that any of the governments could be doing to assist in that?
Anything more the government could be doing?
Just help with export control, really. I mean, that's
yeah,
something that's it's a bit of a mystery to a lot of startups. Obviously, it's the regulations, there's a lot of dual use, and what category does this? There's certain parts of satellites that are classed as more sensitive than others, and things like that.
Whenever we've reached out on specifics, then it does take time, for sure. So I guess one of the things that they could do is speed up the time to get approvals.
So export control licences, obviously that's a function of the UK government, so really it's the UK government providing a bit more information or assistance in the pathway through that then, is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're seeing a lot more startups get involved in space, so there obviously is a lot of regulations historically, and certainly export control is one of them, and trying to help these startups that satellites can fit in a briefcase, but that's kind of an unusual thing. So it's how do you handle that from an export control perspective? It's kind of interesting. What's dual use and what's not, really? Like when does it become kind of dual use and when doesn't it?
Yeah, and one thing would be helpful is knowing upfront where the lines, being able to get quick responses upfront before we've sunk quite a lot of cost into an opportunity, because these opportunities do cost a lot, and so having a clear steer one way or the other that this couldn't ever get export cleared would be really helpful. And I think, again, I haven't been through it since, but I had some positive conversations in November with government officials about that, and so we're currently exploring an opportunity like it. So fingers crossed.
Well, good luck. Yeah. Right, thanks, Chair.
Christine Jarton.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming along. Apologies for being late. I had to be in the chamber. And from what I caught of Mr. Ross's questions, you may already have touched on this, but I was thinking about the skills and that you need in the space workforce in Scotland. And a visit to Glasgow, we heard how difficult it is to attract the right people and to keep them in the sector. And what I wondered was, do you need more from the Scottish and UK governments in terms of helping to attract a workforce?
Yeah, I think we obviously tried a little bit earlier on, but certainly we'll take any help we can get. We're not fussy about where it comes from. Hiring is hard. Hiring is hard for any company. Space has its own challenges. I think each business everybody's business has slightly different skills gaps, skills challenges. I think people are moving to Glasgow, generally speaking, to work in the space sector, albeit there's a lot more demand for space talent than there was maybe 10 years ago. Probably 10 years ago there was probably 25 people working directly on spacecraft, and now there's probably 300-400 directly working on spacecraft. So that's a huge exponential growth in demand for people. And a lot of people that join Alba have never worked in the space sector before. It's probably similar for Steve and other folks' companies, and trying to obviously retain those people and look after them and try and get people who are there for the journey is a big challenge.
Was there anything you wanted to add, Mr. Greenland?
I think for me it comes down to, and having seen this, I think that UCube 1, when we did that, then it was great at bringing this talent pool together within academia, within industry, and starting to get an ecosystem. And so that brought in the first skills. And so I think that you then look at the impact of that 10 years on. We launched that 10 years ago. And you do see the skills out there in other businesses. You do see kind of six companies, I think now, have been started by those who were involved in the early days at Clyde Space. Mm-hmm. So I think that in terms of kind of innovation and sustainable innovation within an ecosystem, then having these kinds of kind of capability demonstrators, probably more focused now towards new types of service that we can deliver from space. They can really provide a focal point for a whole ecosystem and for different skills to be developed and attracting that talent into a kind of a critical mass.
What I wondered was, specifically from what you're saying, one of the things that I have found is that there still appears to be a general lack of awareness of the scale of the industry and the potential in Scotland, even with the publicity about Saxiford and people talking about Glasgow especially. I wondered if there were any parallels or lessons to be drawn from the way that the games industry in Scotland grew and the problems they had originally, and the fact that they were so closely tied to linked with Abertay University and the growth there. And whether there is something from that, not to say I don't mean in terms of the skills and the industries being similar, but the growth potential and the need for new skills in the same way. Are there lessons that you can draw there? Is there a parallel?
Yeah, I mean, I know sort of a little bit about this game sector in Dundee. I don't necessarily know the details of what came before and what happened after in terms of the sort of skills. I mean, certainly it feels, it's really hard for me to know, because I'm so in the weeds of the sector, it's really hard for me to be objective as to what does the guy in the street think about the space sector in Glasgow. Yeah. You know, it's like, it's my baby.
I think the guy in the street knows about the space sector in Glasgow.
I mean, you'd have to ask him, I guess. I mean, I would hope so. I'm so out of touch with just what people generally would know in Glasgow or in Scotland in general. I mean, certainly I think it's hard when you're a small company to spend a lot of time trying to bang the drum too much, because
you have money.
You got to keep customers happy. You got to find new customers. So I think there's this kind of implied assumption of leadership that we should be out there just going on every news channel and pumping out articles saying, look at this, and it's quite hard as a small company to do that. We run a conference in Glasgow every year for the PodCube Developer Conference, and we bring people from all around the world. So I mean, that's starting to get a bit of attention. We have hundreds of people coming to that event now, so that's quite exciting, and that's growing. So, but whether the average person in Glasgow knows or not, I can tell you. I would hope so, and I think hopefully someone's run into somebody that works at a company or something, or someone's cousins, aunties, sisters, brothers worked at somewhere, or knows somebody that did.
Word of mouth is not really. It's more the kind of university students, first years, who are maybe interested in science, attracting them knowing that the potential is there.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of tricky because people we hire, obviously nobody exists, so it's kind of selection bias. So, I mean, I don't know how many great people we're missing, and if we did, we'd be trying to fix that. Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of CVs, and we do miss probably a lot of people, and we only have so many seats, so you can only do so much as a small company. So, yeah, I mean, I'm very biased towards space and small satellites. It's smallest work, so I'm obviously can tell anybody to listen to me we're doing this, and that's why I'm here.
Mr. Greenland, in your written evidence, you said that more in-orbit demonstrations procured by government customers would inspire more people into space careers. Why do you think that's currently not happening?
I can't answer that, I don't think. I mean, the government hasn't necessarily had a will to place procurement contracts in the past. I think that for us, then we've been really fortunate in getting the mission that we have done, supported by UKSA and supported by ESA, through that process, and have fundraised in order to do that. But I think that is quite a long journey to have to go on. I think that the timescales to get all the pieces in place does take a lot of time. I think that there might be more opportunities by government giving out more signals about what is needed. Then around that can be, for example, CDT programs within universities, can be skills force development within the companies, can be attracting talent. Why that hasn't happened to date, I think one of the reasons is that we can be quite risk averse, and that it's when we put a lot of money onto one particular thing and say, like, this is what we're doing, we're going to go and launch this type of satellite for this type of application, it does garner a lot of interest, and that then means that it almost then draws attention to it. And I think that we should be saying we should be treating it as we want 5 of them in different locations or in different types of application, so that then we're spreading the risk, because space is still a challenging environment to develop systems, and if you want to develop skills and if you want to develop younger people to be able to deliver these types of systems, then you have to be able to fail. And I think some types of government procurement won't accept any type of failure.
We also don't really have a culture of universities flying satellites in the UK. So like in America, like a lot of people that end up in the space sector work at SpaceX, wherever, like often they've flown like a satellite in university. And this is just really something that's never really happened in the UK for a bunch of different reasons. Regulatory is a big piece. It's very difficult to get a launch license. I was recently out in ESA and they do this Fly Your Satellite program, and they had 8 teams from around Europe, and they started doing POCUBEs for the first time, and there was no UK teams represented, you know. So I think we don't really have a culture of flying satellites, but we have a lot of culture of starting companies that fly satellites. So it's kind of a weird mix in the UK between cultures, and I think within government there's not a huge... I think like it's much easier to sign off a 500k grant for some random piece of technology than to sign off like 500k to go get the prototype flying, you know, and there's all the barriers to getting the regulations sorted as well for flying. So there's just not really a culture of that here, and I think a lot of well-meaning people are trying to get that going, but it just kind of fizzles out without critical mass.
Fascinated by what you're saying about university satellites in the US being... Is it commonplace for them to do that now?
So we've launched, we've launched 41 satellites so far, and 15 of the ones were we built for our own use and internal customers. But one of the 41, we do rideshare, so we basically buy space on our SpaceX Falcon 9, and then we subsell that out to customers around the world. And one of our customers is a Hungarian. There's the Hungarian customers, but there's also the Romanian customers. So there's a Hungarian university has flown like 4 or 5 satellites now, and they do one a year basically, or approximately once a year. And you know, they basically built, you know, that is basically the Hungarian space program, is this university. We just launched a bunch of high school kids from Romania. They flew their first 2 satellites.
So kids from Romania?
Yeah. So these are like 15, 16-year-old kids that basically, I mean, it's a private school. They're, you know, it's sort of maybe the Eton of Romania, if you will. But they wanted to go fly a satellite, so you know, they got the funding together and they came to us, and we launched 2 of their satellites, which are now in orbit. And that was very... You don't really see that in the UK, you know, unfortunately.
What do you use them for in the UK? I mean, what would it say... Edinburgh University, what would they
Yeah, I mean, so we fly imaging satellites predominantly for imaging Earth at night. So the nighttime use cases are things like one of our customers is National Park Service of America, so we image national parks. There's a lot of stuff around like population. So say you wanted to figure out the population of Afghanistan, how would you do that? Well, a big indication is if you could image it at night, you'd see how much light is produced over the whole country. And then if you go into one village and maybe count how many people in one village, you could then start to get like census data of different locations.
It's a research tool.
It's a research tool. There's, during COVID, there's sort of a lot of interesting pictures of like what's happening, in different parts of the world at night and how well the lockdown, like are places in lockdown, like obviously UK knows what's going on in the UK, but does it know what's going on in Argentina or China or Brazil? And from Earth observation, you can get that capability to say, well, actually, China seems to currently be in a lockdown. They haven't announced it, but they are. And you can tell from the fact that there's less people on the roads, because they're not producing as much light and things like that. There's so much intelligence about the world you can gather from small satellites.
Universities.
So universities, yeah, every university has its own thing it cares about. So it's kind of hard to generalise, but if you can imagine it, you can fly it. And yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam Kaiser.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the panel for joining us today. I'm really interested to learn a little bit more about the challenges you face with staff retention. It's something that we've discussed quite a lot when we had our committee session last year up in Glasgow. It definitely came up. So I'm really interested just to hear from both your perspectives, what challenges are you facing in terms of both finding and then retaining staff? Tom, do you want to start first?
Yeah, certainly it's tough to find good people just generally, whether it's space sector or any sector. And, we have lots of great people work at Alba, but certainly finding people that have the skills and have the appetite and want to, stay with you for the long term that's quite hard to find this sort of combination of skills. So yeah, we've had to manage different strategies. We have interns, we have graduates, we have people come from other industries. I think every company is still trying to figure out, to be honest, like what works for them. And it's about trial and error as well. It's more like making an omelette than anything really. You got to get the right people on the bus, and you got to get them kind of motivated, and you got to get them all getting along with each other and being constructive. And but obviously, every company seems to have that challenge. So,
anything you'd like to add to
that? Probably not more than I've already said around kind of I guess how we would see it would be we expect quite a lot from our team, so we need to make sure that we're rewarding them with things like shares and ownership, so that they're able to kind of develop, learn more about business, because ultimately, those are the types of people that we need within the economy in the future. And I think that just takes time. As Tom was saying, there wasn't many space engineers in Glasgow when I was fortunate enough to move there, and it's a fantastic place to live. Yeah. And now there is. So there needs to be programs that keep people there, that keep people inspired, and you can't just focus on skills within schools and universities. You have to look at kind of continuous workforce improvement and training and hands-on, because it's not been the case historically that there has been enough hands-on training within universities, and so that's the part that we have to play as small businesses.
Just to follow up with the share scheme, so I think even just like we do a share scheme, 10% of our companies, up for employees for remuneration. I think there's just in Scotland in general, the UK, there's just not a big weighting on share options and that sort of aspect. I feel like companies are kind of have it hard both ways. If you don't do it, then it feels like you're holding something back, and if you do it, people maybe feel that they should get it in salary, or they don't appreciate it as much. So it's kind of a tricky balance culturally, because while we raise capital in Silicon Valley and share options are very well understood, and that's how a lot of people made their money, it's not really a big it seems like the average person in Scotland doesn't know anybody that made any money with share options, if you know what I mean. So there is just kind of misunderstanding of that kind of tool, I think, generally, and people aren't necessarily aware of the whole kind of startup culture, I think, as much in Glasgow and Scotland as would be like San Francisco is, so. Do
you think that culture's changed since you first joined the space sector?
I think it's slightly improved. I think it's still got a long way to go. I think just generally trying to support people building things in the world is like a good thing. And we should try and help the builders of things and try not to demoralise them. And if you demoralise them, they probably won't build anything. I think that's generally what we should be doing.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting concept because I suppose on one hand then you're ensuring that your staff and your employees are literally bought into the business, they're invested in it, and they want to ensure that you do well as a company, and they've got that personal touch there. It was really interesting, Steve, to hear you talk about training. From what we've heard in committee, it seems that responsibility and that onus on training within industry is on the industry to fund that training rather than anyone else, which can then become a burden onto SMEs. Is this something that you recognise, and if so, what do you think should be done about it?
So we do spend a fair amount per person on training, and one of the challenges that we have faced, and this is a very specific kind of problem, is that there is some support for kind of skills-based training within Scottish enterprise. But by the time it's been processed, then usually that training programme had already finished. So you can't actually then use the money on that training programme. So we need to expect that training beyond just undergraduate, so continual learning for the first kind of 5 years or so of an individual's career is critical in space, and we probably need some sort of fund that can match some of the investment that companies make, because we are making a lot, and currently those mechanisms, they might exist but they're quite inflexible, and so we struggle to actually use them, and they take a lot of effort. So if there was just the understanding that we will be investing, and therefore this can be matched in some way, and actually whether or not that person then chooses to stay with our business, maybe moves to Tom's business, maybe moves somewhere else, that's still valuable for the UK. And so we can all kind of move forward by investing in those kinds of skills, and you would get more visibility about what training is required, because it would be genuinely based on the training that the companies are paying for. So, a 50-50 type arrangement, and then you could use that to make better decisions in future.
It was really interesting to hear you frame investing in staff as valuable to the UK, because when we as a committee met with different businesses, one of the concerns that we heard was that actually some companies might be a little bit hesitant to invest in staff because the fear is that they might go off not just to other businesses within the sector but to other sectors. So what could be done to help Scottish companies invest in the workforce? Both of you.
It's a good question. What could be done to help us invest in... So we run our conference, which is sort of like a CPD. So we're kind of fortunate in that we basically bring all the developers of PodCubes around the world to Glasgow, and we bring all our staff to that event, so they get to meet, every expert in the world that is working on it. So our software engineers can meet 5 or 10 other software engineers that are developing satellites that are flying, and talk to them and learn from them, or ADCS as pointing systems or cameras or whatnot. So a big part of our CPD is like our conference and networking and things like that. I mean, I think you can, it's kind of tricky in a startup because you're kind of looking for people that are self-aware enough to kind of fill in their own gaps. It's very hard as a small company. A bigger company, I think, has more leeway to have someone allocated full-time to be worrying about it. When you only have 15 seats, then the opportunity cost of freeing up a seat to be somebody worrying about that problem. So it ends up being a tricky one, to really allocate enough internal resources to, because you're small in numbers. If you have 150 people, it's much easier to put one person on, worrying about training versus 15 people. So the opportunity cost is quite high. But yeah, I mean, I think like for most companies, it's sort of trial and error. It depends on the role a lot. We're trying to go to more process-based operations, so documenting our workloads and for building the satellite, proceduralizing it. So there is like this is how you build a unicorn satellite, and this is all the steps it takes, and this is like, the training, and there's videos and stuff. So we haven't really had any external support in that. That's mostly just been an internal kind of best practice type thing that we're working on. But there's like many conflicting things we need to do. So it's kind of hard to put the amount of man-hours into that we'd like. But yeah, obviously if we had more support to do that, then obviously we would do more of that. And yeah. So.
You?
I'd say you really can't get over the experience that's needed. And so then for me it comes back to having these kind of capability demonstrators, because that allows you to develop the skills, it allows you to kind of bring people in, it allows a business like us to reach out to universities and pull in some of the knowledge that they've got there into the business. And they can be then a nucleus for kind of everything that comes next. And of course, like, this is the people within the space industry are what make the space industry. So it's
I mean, the best thing to do is to fly satellites, is to learn about how to fly satellites. And Steve's like a great example of that, having done UCube and now Craft. So, the more people that have hands-on experience learn, you fly, you try, you learn, you fly again. That's generally how it's done, and that's where you get experience from, is by learning through action. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. We'll just suspend briefly to let our other guests come and join us. But for today, thank you guys both very much. I think there was a couple of things you might get back to us about, I can't remember, but if there was, I'm sure our clerks will be chasing you up about that. Thank you for your attendance this afternoon.
You guys want to see the satellite, or?
Oh, yeah.
If you could pass it around, well, I know we're going to have to get straight on with other guests.
I'll come and get it.
Yep.
What's up?
Suspended. The proceeding is currently 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 suspended.
Back to the Scottish Affairs Committee, and we'll now hear from a couple of representatives from what called the satellite applications sector, and we'll now allow them to introduce themselves and maybe talk about your company, what you do, and what you're interested in this inquiry is. We'll start with you, Ms. Middlemiss.
Thank you. So yes, I'm Sarah Middlemiss, formerly Chief Operating Officer of a company called Ecometrica, although we were acquired towards the end of last year by another company called EcoOnline. But I'll give you sort of the basis of what Ecometrica does. So we are a sustainability software company founded in 2008. So what we do is help companies measure and report on their environmental and sustainability impacts. And it's very much driven by regulations, so UK mandatory carbon reporting, regulations in the EU around corporate reporting. So So I joined the business in 2014, and that's when the geospatial part of the business, which uses satellite data, was really starting to sort of take off, no pun intended. So what that does is it sort of complements and adds to sort of GHG accounting by looking at the context and other environmental impacts. So looking at land use change, deforestation, and over the past few years, what we've seen is the regulations and reporting requirements of companies is really starting to need to use that information. So looking at physical climate risk across their operations and supply chains, things like deforestation, supply chains of cocoa, palm oil, and that kind of thing. But as I say, we were acquired last year by a company called EcoOnline, which is headquartered in London, which is a software company that looks at environmental health and safety as well as chemical management. So we form a sort of third pillar that is ESG for that company. So we're still kind of going through that integration process.
Thank you. Mr. Cannon.
Thank you very much. I'm Allan Cannon. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Krucial. I have got a background in both defence and space. I previously worked with Clyde Space as the head of missions, working with customers such as NASA, European Space Agency, and a whole load of Silicon Valley startups. I started my business alongside my co-founder, who was also with Clyde Space, in 2018, and have grown the business to 25 people in Scotland. Krucial helps organisations become more sustainable. We help them reduce their risk, and we help them increase their profitability. How do we do that? We help them connect their assets and their operations to the cloud. We use satellite-enabled connectivity platform that means that we can move data from any sensor, from any location on the planet, to any data application. We build solutions, and we help our customers and our partners to help build solutions on top of our platform. And we're working with some of the biggest organisations in the world, and we're starting to export our product into international markets.
I'm just seeing, and you've obviously described it in your introductory remarks, about moving from company to company. Is this something that's a feature of the growing sectors such as space in Scotland? Would you expect to move on to different companies within the sector? And I don't know, a short period of time, medium period?
Yeah, working with Clyde Space at a time when they were the only company in Scotland was quite an interesting area, and it coincided with a real change in the space industry. Clyde Space was and still is an extremely innovative company, working with some of the major organisations out there. But this coincided with what we call new space, which is essentially been enabled by the types of satellite platforms that Tom had in front of you, so small satellites, CubeSats that Clyde Space build, and that's enabled essentially a democratisation of the space industry, where it's no longer government agencies and large corporates that can afford to purchase and procure space data and space assets, but small startups can do that. So,
do you all know each other quite well then in the sector?
We do.
I sort of got that sense from other colleagues that were here joining us, and there does seem to be. It's a relatively small community, and do you tend to work together and collaborate when necessary? Is that how?
Yeah, I would say so.
To be characterised,
yeah, it's quite a tight-knit ecosystem. Everyone does pretty much know everyone, and you kind of have that full kind of cycle across the space supply chain as well. So it's quite, and I think that's probably quite a strength of the sector, that idea that we, on the application side, we're speaking to customers who might not have that much knowledge of space or sensors or what they need, but we can digest and sort of take, well, this is the problem, and feed that back through the supply chain so that the satellites being launched are meaningful in addressing real challenges, rather than going up for the sake of, research for research's sake.
We've not had a chance, I think, to visit any of the application businesses in Scotland. We've been shown around Clyde Space and it's at Clyde Port in Glasgow and the other satellite businesses. Is Scotland a good place for you guys? Is an emerging part of the sector that you've got, and what do you see your prospects about being based in Scotland, and how do you contribute to the ongoing progress of Scotland's space sector? We'll start with you, Mr. Cannon, if that's all right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we have some fantastic universities across Scotland, world class in a lot of the areas that they focus on. And the amount of talent that is coming out into the Scottish market is extremely well regarded. I think that the industry is in a very strong position to continue to grow and to continue to expand and deliver return into the UK coffers. I think that we now have that end-to-end capability, and by end-to-end capability, the ability to launch, the ability to build satellites, the ability to take the data that we are collecting and turning it into meaningful, valuable data that can then be sold. We have that ability in Scotland. I was recently in Malaysia and Singapore on a trade mission. And Malaysia are looking at what we've done in Scotland as an industry and looking to either work with the Scottish businesses that have grown up within that ecosystem, but also to work with the Scottish Government and the UK Government to build their own industry. So I think we're at a stage now where we have a set of products, or we have a product that we can export. And there are a number of companies that are looking to export that as part of that initiative. So yes, I think we're in a very strong position. I think we're starting to build businesses of scale. So I think we're at a very critical point where businesses are starting to break out, and there are certainly some challenges that we need to address. And some of those have been covered earlier, such as financing and skills, etc. But I think we have a very strong foundation for growth.
And is that the same experience for you, Middlemiss? Is it a good place to be, Scotland, just now when it comes to your business?
Yeah, I would say so. I think similarly, that kind of network of universities and that pool of talent is really an advantage. Most of our, we similarly recruit a lot of young graduates, and a large proportion of them do come from Scottish universities. And I think there's a huge amount of talent and research excellence, particularly across the central belt in data applications. And even kind of you see an emerging kind of fintech sector within Scotland, and those skills are very transferable, and it's kind of being able to leverage them across both sectors. I think there are definitely still challenges, and I think and I don't think it's unique to Scotland necessarily, but in that kind of scale-up phase. But particularly in terms of just sort of unlocking investment and the cost of being a small business. But in general, I think being part of this ecosystem of knowledge and skills and like I say, having that kind of end-to-end capability and is a real advantage. Yeah.
And just understanding you've just been acquired by EcoOnline, isn't it? Which is Norwegian-based. I've got in my notes here. Is that correct?
Yes, although they've recently moved headquarters to London, but yeah.
Is this an issue at all for headquartering? Obviously, I think we'd all like to think that like all this initiative and the creativity is going into building your business you'd be retained. Is it a problem, a difficulty issue, the fact that we're not specifically headquartered and owned in Scotland?
I don't think so. I mean, I think our kind of the core bit of what we do around sustainability and climate indicators and using data, that will still be based in Scotland. What having a larger company behind us in the London headquarters and offices across the world is it makes it easier to kind of, for that customer facing and that sales. There aren't very many of our customers who are in Scotland, but there are a lot who are headquartered in London, and there are a lot internationally as well. So having that is kind of the best of both worlds. We have the talent, and if you like, the kind of the ESG engine, as I like to call it, within Scotland. But we also can leverage being part of a bigger company that can kind of flex on the world stage.
And you're Scottish headquartered and owned, is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, although we do have international investors, so we have investors in the US and also
are you tempted?
Dubai.
Are you looking around? Is there any people who are thinking about maybe taking you off to wherever around the world?
There's always a commercial decision to be made about where the best place to base your business, but I see an opportunity to build a large Scottish business or UK-based business which has offices in other parts of the world, and because our technology has no geographic boundaries, therefore, we have customers globally, and we will be looking globally for both investment and for partners and customers. But it's our aspiration to build a large Scottish business, which has the majority of our team in Scotland. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. If I was to headquarter my business in Silicon Valley and grow a business in Silicon Valley, the cost of staffing that would be about 5 times as much as it would be in Scotland. So we have an advantage to building a business in Scotland that a lot of US investors don't really appreciate until you sit down and chat to them, and you explain to them that we can make your money go further. So there's a lot of aspects of that, and I think that's something that we should capitalise on.
Okay. And just, I think you listened to the previous session with your colleagues that were in from the satellite business, and we were asking just about their awareness and what they made of the respective UK and Scottish Government space strategies. Have you got a view about what you've observed? I think I listed some of the goals that were indicated in the UK strategy. What do you make of it? Have you got a great awareness of it? Does it make a difference to what you're doing? And just basically tell us what you think about it. We'll start with you, Ms. Middlemiss.
I mean, I think the goals are admirable, but I think the proof is in the pudding, I suppose, and I think delivery is and could be a challenge. I think the kind of levelling up of space and really kind of scaling growth, I think probably needs a bit more investment. It's really hard to scale a small business in Scotland, and I in the rest of the UK as well. As a small business, we're always terms takers, whether that's on the customer side when we're contracting with larger clients, or even on this, when we're procuring our own services, and that's a lot of risk and a lot of burden that small companies have to take on. So there's a real kind of cost of business, and this, particularly in Scotland, where such a huge proportion of small businesses, that's quite a large chunk of the economy that is taking on a risk that's disproportionate to the size that they are. But also kind of just actually leveraging that scale-up capital is really, really difficult. And I think it was alluded to in the previous session that kind of appetite for risk, both from government and also, I would say, private investment, it's not there in the same way that it is in California. And granted, so the level of funding isn't there also, but there has to be some big bets placed in order to kind of unlock that scale, because it's a bottleneck at the moment for sure.
And what's your view of the respective UK and Scottish Government space strategies, Mr. Cannon?
Well, I like the fact that we have a strategy in the first place. I think that's a great first.
Reassuring, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. So it stimulates conversation around what the strategy should be and what the next iteration of that strategy should be. I think it's a great first step. I think there's potential there's opportunities for us to engage with more of the space ecosystem. I think there's a lot of focus on the upstream aspect, the launch and satellite aspects, where actually there's a huge proportion of the space industry that is in the downstream aspect, so closer to the application, closer to the problems, and actually a lot of the return on investment is actually going to come through that part of the ecosystem. However, I think it's a great first step that we have a strategy, and just to also add to what Sarah said, the capital side of things is the biggest challenge, I think, and maybe a bit of focus on how we leverage both public and private finance to accelerate the sector would be a great next step.
Thank you. Christine Jarton.
Thank you very much. You will have heard what was said by the previous witnesses, and thank you for coming along and for being here for all of the afternoon. So I wonder if I could ask you, though, when we're looking at the future of the industry, what would you say are the main obstacles to scaling up a Scottish space business?
Yeah. So I think that we are at a massive disadvantage from the ecosystem perspective. And what I mean by that is that the ecosystem for startups and scale-ups is not as mature as an ecosystem such as London, such as Silicon Valley, such as some of the more established ecosystems. What that means is that we have to go elsewhere to look for the experience of the talent that is required, the talent that has gone through a scaling journey. We don't have that within Scotland. We don't have the capital, the same level of capital that's available in more developed ecosystems. And we don't have the successful businesses that have gone through an exit, present company excluded, but who have gone through an exit and then the talent and the capital has returned back into the ecosystem and helped to stimulate it. So I think the more companies that we see breaking out, we'll start to create a flywheel effect where more of that money, more of that talent will come back into the ecosystem and will help to do it. So yeah, so the big focus is, the big challenges I think we need to look at is how do we create more scale up businesses in the sector? How do we unlock some of the regulation that we have around procurement, etc. I'd love to talk to somebody beyond this session around how we can work with government and how we can use government as a potential customer within our business. I'd love to see how to unlock that, and I think that would be a good thing. One of the biggest challenges, and actually a lot of, I'm sure, my peers who run businesses in Scotland and elsewhere in the UK, the best way to grow a business is to have customers. So finding ways to get new customers. I would rather grow my business organically rather than sell portions of my business off to investors. But it's very difficult to do in the early stages when the risk is high, and you're trying to convince multinational businesses to take a risk on what is a small and fragile business. If government could help essentially balance that risk and help unlock some potential contracts, that would be a really good way to stimulate early stage businesses.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with all your points. I mean, yeah, access to capital is a huge one, and I think that's a really good point about that expertise of people who know how to scale a business. When we've talked about talent and skills, we've talked a lot about maybe more of the technical skills and the graduates and doctoral programs, and they're amazing because that's what builds the product. But in terms of what builds the business beyond that startup phase, that kind of expertise is missing, and it's difficult to get in, for sure. But also to your point on customers, that's a huge one, and I think it's a challenge, I think, particularly at our end, at the applications end, because we're right at the end of that space data value chain. Our customers, particularly our customers, they don't really see us as a space company, and I'd say they probably don't care that we're a space company. If I've got a Garmin watch and I'm tracking my run, I'm not thinking, well, I'll put my space watch on. I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to be able to see how long I've run, and I'm probably not even necessarily thinking about GPS. And ideally, that's what our customers are thinking as well. They're thinking, okay, I can measure or report on these specific things that I need to using these experts. And I think part of the challenge that the kind of, is a strength and a weakness of the space sector in Scotland is because we are this big ecosystem. It's, I think, a bit more challenging to support those applications because our customers and our verticals aren't in the space sector. They could be in the finance sector, they could be in big ag, they could be elsewhere. So making those links, and being able to support that, whether it's Scottish Enterprise or the UK government, it's sort of an extra leap in looking beyond just that kind of insular sector.
That's interesting. So rather than just simply thinking about dealing with maybe the UK space agencies and Scottish government, what you really want to be thinking about are dealing with agricultural companies, for weather satellites? I'm trying to think.
Of course.
Generally out of the box. So you're not looking at expanding by having better contacts within the space sector. You're looking at expanding by having better contacts in other sectors.
Absolutely.
How useful then is working with, well, maybe the space agency, but other government bodies? Which particular government bodies do you think would be useful to you in growing your businesses, government departments? Would it be DCIT? Would it be DEFRA? That sort of thing.
I mean, yeah, I think definitely DCIT and DEFRA would be some of them. I mean, so historically we have worked quite closely with the UK government. So back when DFID was DFID, we had a sort of 2 to 3 year contract with them, and it was around monitoring their investments in international forest or protecting forests internationally. And I think obviously anything to do with trade, with industrial strategy, that's a key one for us. But again, I think going back to some of the points that have been raised so far, that kind of constant engagement with government is quite time consuming, and for a small business it can really sap up a lot of energy, and it's something that we did invest a lot in pre-2020 really, and we did get some growth as a result, but most of our growth has come through a much more commercial route, engaging with customers directly. So it's difficult to find that balance, particularly as a smaller company.
What do you think that the UK and Scottish governments could do, that they could do more of to help you scale up? Direct funding, attract investment from else? Are there specific things that you think they could do?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are things like the Scottish National Investment Banks and other investment banks that are around, but I think again it's that kind of appetite of risk, and fully appreciate there's a balance there. It's taxpayers' money. However, if you really want to unlock that growth, you've got to make some bets. And I think, as Steve was saying, you've got to be prepared to fail, but know that you've kind of spread your bets enough that the successes will kind of counteract that. That's why California works. It's that fail fast mentality. We don't have the sort of money that they do here, but there's just kind of, encouraging that culture, I think, could make a huge difference.
Thank you.
Thank you. Allan Brown.
Thank you. Good afternoon. If you just go back to that theme about government as customer, it's obviously I asked the first witnesses about it, and Christine touched on it there. But if we're writing a report, which we will be doing following this, what would be the key recommendations we should be making for the government to be a customer, and what the barriers are, and what government needs to change to actually allow them to be a meaningful customer for you, and clearly for governments and agencies to actually realise the benefits that they're presumably missing out on at the moment. So I'll just start with yourself, Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, one of the challenges that we've seen historically, particularly around kind of EO applications, is that it's very kind of bitty and project based, and there are lots of well-intentioned programs that are maybe kind of R&D based with the intention of having a contract at the end of it. But once the proof of the concept has been proved, the business case is made, there's then a new government, or there's the spending review, so the budget just isn't there, so you're sort of investing a lot of this time to then no contract at the end of it. And I think across government, there's so much use of Earth observation data across various different departments, but it's not particularly consolidated or rationalised. And I think things like the Geospatial Strategy and Commission should start to bring that together, but it's not something that, well, I've personally seen kind of what the outputs of that are yet. Like I say, and that might be because I'm not as engaged as I used to be in government goings on, but I think that if it works, that will be an effective good step. But then also just similarly procurement barriers for small companies. It's hard. You're a terms taker. The contracts are 150 pages long. You're having to there are various audit requirements, policies you have to have in place, certifications. So really, it's only worth your while if it's going to be a big contract at the end of it. And for there to be a big contract at the end of it, there needs to be a strategy around how Earth observation data is used, how communications are used, whatever it might be, and that's obviously it's quite a long play in government.
Yeah. I would say there's probably some frameworks that UK government could look at, such as the SBIR grant in the US, which is a multi-phase framework, which has a small feasibility element to it, and then a odd successful completion, move into a larger phase, and then a commercial procurement off the back of that. So there's other methods to grow, which manages the risk for the government, but also provides a framework for and a clear road to, if this phase 1 is successful, phase 2 is successful, then you have a nice clear framework to then move into. And I guess that's a way of balancing the risk of a startup and the technology, but also giving a clear guidance for not only for the startup but the startup's investors as well, to say once you've gone through this, there's now a potential multi-million-pound contract off the back of it. That solves quite a lot of problems, I think, and we don't really have anything like that here in the UK, which would allow startups to leverage that model.
Okay. And earlier on you had mentioned about government helping to unlock contracts. Is that what you had in mind, or is there other things that government should be doing, UK or Scottish government, to help unlock and provide access to contracts?
That particular point is more focused on government procurement rather than other aspects, than kind of supporting commercial contracts. But I think certainly in the early stages, if there were opportunities that commercial opportunities that are there to be unlocked, then I would love to see how the UK government and Scottish governments could help come alongside small businesses to open up those contracts and provide assurances, essentially underwriting that contract with some mechanism that would really help and balance risk for both the customer and for the startup as well.
Okay. Is there even a barrier in terms of who do you speak to, who do you engage with, to say, here's what we could do for you, or here's what you've been doing, but we can do this so much better if you actually give us an opportunity? Is there any sort of disconnect in terms of being able to do that joined up discussion?
Would you be able to explain the question a little bit more, please?
Well, what I'm thinking about, we talk about government as a customer, which in many ways actually means different departments or different agencies. But I'm just wondering, is there even a disconnect? How do you go and tap somebody's door and say, here's what we could do for you, or here's the services, you've been doing this way for 20 years, but give us an opportunity, we can deliver a process for you much cheaper.
Yeah. Well, there's no single entry point. I think that's the problem. There are so many different departments and ways for businesses to look at it. And we only have enough time. I think it's been mentioned quite a lot through this panel. The startups were resource constrained, bandwidth constrained, and also financially constrained. So we it would be great if there was essentially an account manager that could point us in the direction. We've had account managers, for example, in Scottish Enterprise, Scottish Development International, DBT, which helps in some sense, but having that level of engagement where someone essentially takes ownership of you and helps you navigate the government agencies, and which government agencies so they spend time to educate themselves about the business and what the business value that they could bring to government, and then work on your behalf essentially within government. I think that could be an effective model.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, I do think that's a role that the UK Space Agency or some part of the UK Space Agency can and should play. Perhaps not that account manager role, but certainly that almost flipping it on its head and going to government and saying, okay, what are your challenges? What are the gaps? What are the constraints? Because actually, there are a lot of companies within our remit who could help solve those, and kind of providing that linkage between the two. I think most companies within the space ecosystem have some kind of interaction with UK Space Agency, but they might not with DCIT or directly or DEFRA, whoever it might be. But UK Space Agency, I think, really could have a role to play there.
Okay, thanks. Sarah, if I can just start with yourself. So we've actually been told that in theory any company could be a space company. And you've already touched on so much of it's actually data management and data analysis and the likes. And clearly you've been acquired by a broader environmental data company. So could more Scottish-based firms benefit from that type of branching out? And if so, what kind of support's needed just to grasp these wider opportunities?
That's a good question. I mean, yes, I definitely think they can branch out. I think, something that I think the sector is trying to beat the drum of is that space has many applications and can feed into many different sectors. I think definitely linking up where there are different clusters and where there are different sectors that government is already kind of pushing, they're in a place there to link up. I've sort of alluded to FinTech earlier. That's got quite a strong ecosystem in Scotland, and there is work now going on to kind of pull those together. And I think also, particularly looking at kind of export opportunities, it's something that SDI are very enthusiastic about, though maybe haven't quite got it right, because they do have this network of people in different countries. For us, that could be a real opportunity to link us up with potential partners. We're probably not going to sell directly into Singapore, but if we had a channel partner who could then do the selling. But I think the challenge there is, again, because we're applications and not space, we have to specify and really kind of say, okay, these are the kind of partners that might be interested, and it's quite a range. It could be environmental consultants, it could be accountants, it's quite a range. So it is a challenge, to be fair, but more can be done.
Okay, thanks. Now, can I just ask you, your company's effectively centred on the Internet of Things, if I use that phrase. Is there anything else that UK and Scottish governments could be doing in terms of to support the growth of satellite applications, other than just simply Earth observation?
Absolutely. I think there's definitely more to the space industry and the application side than Earth observation. There's the data analytics that utilises the Earth observation data, but there's also the connectivity piece, which is enabling digital transformation for many enterprises globally, and that's really what we focus on, is helping organisations connect their assets, and that data then comes back to the cloud and can be combined with Earth observation data to provide more value to the customers. A couple of examples that I can give. So we're working with a large organisation to help digitise water basins, and that's essentially collecting environmental data from water to help them manage and mitigate the effects of climate change. And that can't be done with Earth observation alone. For example, Earth observation can provide an insight into whether there's a pollution event happening within a watercourse, but it can't actually tell you which nitrites or phosphates, etc., are there. So there's in order to get the maximum value, in situ data has to be taken in a lot of cases. So that's what we do, and that's where we can help. Another example would be in the aquaculture industry. The aquaculture industry is an incredible industry, and what we're doing with that industry is helping that industry get the data that they need to both grow and become more sustainable. And a lot of the operations tend to be in remote and rural areas, and therefore there's a barrier to digitisation, i.e. they need to send people to collect data. So the technologies that we are developing and others are developing have a real positive impact on the economy from a perspective of digitisation can happen, and all the benefits that can come with digitisation that sometimes can only happen in connected areas. That's the technologies that are now there to reduce that barrier, to break down that barrier, and stimulate growth and sustainability off the back of that.
Okay, so you give clear examples here of benefits and growth opportunities, but is there anything that the UK government or the Scottish government should be doing to actually help maximise these opportunities? Or
I think it comes down to the kind of previous comments about how we can work together to unlock. When there are companies that have the ability to become a scale up, is really try and get behind them from a customer perspective. How can we unlock new customers? From a talent perspective, how can we support this business in creating the talent and also the training, but also on the finance side of things, how can we help grow this business? Because we're competing with US companies, we're competing with large European companies. They have access to capital much easier than we do. So these are the areas that are going to give us the advantage. As I said earlier about once we get a number of these scale-ups that are breaking through, then there's a positive impact that comes back into the ecosystem, which we can leverage. So.
Great, thank you. Thanks.
And just lastly, you obviously heard the conversation we had with your colleagues about staffs and skills and retentions. You're a very specialised subsector, if that's an elegant way to sort of categorise what you do. Is that an issue for you at all? Do you find that you get the people you require to grow your businesses?
Go first. I think actually we've been okay. I think we've been able to get access to the talent that we need, and we've been able to retain that talent as well. The areas where we've really struggled is actually on the business side. So on the sales, so having access to professional sales capabilities into the business. I think if you were to look at the US, sales is a professional, it's a revered profession, whereas in the UK it's almost like a second thought.
I think you're not alone in a lot of sectors.
So I think there's an aspect there which is maybe not really appreciated, is that we're just space businesses are just like other businesses. We have the requirements for marketing, finance, sales, etc. As well as the specialist engineering talent.
You'll need. Yeah. About the specialist staff, I'm really interested in what we heard from a number of your colleagues in the sector is that, there's attractions for people who may be interested in your line, whether that be the renewable sector or, involved in other scientific endeavours. Is it a small pool of people that you recruit from, Ms. Middlemiss?
Yeah, I would say so. So the kind of, in terms of specialist skills, the key ones for us are software engineers, but also people with that subject matter expertise in either sort of climate policy and climate reporting. I think the perfection is when you find someone who has all of those skills, and that is slightly more challenging, but we're in a position we can kind of pull them together slightly. I'd say over the past 12 to 18 months, hiring those software engineers has become slightly easier with the knock-on effect with what's been happening in Silicon Valley, but it was really challenging for a while. And I think for us, retention is the challenge for sure, because there's a bit of both a small business and we're a sustainability business, discount on salaries. We just can't compete.
One of the things that I think impressed us when we visited a couple of companies in Glasgow was it was quite an international staff base, and there were people from all over the world there. Is that roughly the same in your sectors? Are you encountering any difficulty to get international staff that you require?
I would say our business used to be more international than it is now. We used to have a lot of EU citizens on our payroll, and we have fewer now. I think typically we do recruit from Scottish and UK universities. That's where the graduates come from. But typically EU students aren't sticking around quite so much. It's a little bit more difficult. So the diversity, but I think diversity is always a bit of a challenge for smaller companies anyway. But it's certainly something that we've seen.
It's again that's another feature that's come up, just diversity related issues, and it's good for having a very diverse, neutral panel today, which is great, and it's good to see you in your role, Ms. Middlemiss. Is there enough women like you coming forward and leading companies in this sector?
I think it's getting there. Certainly when I sort of started dipping my toe into the space sector, it was, the panel discussions you go to at conferences, they did all look the same, and they didn't look like me. But I think it's definitely improving. I think there's a real acknowledgement within the sector that it needs to change, and that there's, and that goes right back beyond companies. That's in sort of education and academics, just encouraging women to go into STEM and to go into business as well, for sure.
Well, good for you, and I hope you set an example for other women to get involved in the space sector. But thank you both ever so much for coming down today, and the other colleagues who joined us earlier. It's been a fascinating session for us, and I think we've learned an awful lot just about the issues and challenges and the opportunities that's there for companies in the Scottish space sector. So thank you very much for coming to London this afternoon. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.